Okay, Constellation training 2018-19, first weekend, September 22nd, Saturday, morning session, second part.
Excellent. So I wanted to share a few teaching moments from that constellation. And when I do this, this goes back to the nonlinearity of the teaching. I'm not necessarily going to say things that you're going to remember or that are in like the right timing in terms of noticing, but I notice them as useful things that I have learned from doing a lot of constellations. And you can take notes or not take notes or just listen and trust that the ones that are important will stick with you. But there's just a few that I want to share with you. Eyes open is really important. A lot of people have the instinct of, now I've stepped into a role and I close my eyes and I go inside, right? And track my energy. This is actually mostly not a helpful movement because constellations to a great degree are about seeing and connecting and including what hasn't been seen. Now, every once in a while, a role wants to close its eyes, and that's fine. So you can say to someone, is that the role? Like, does the role want to have its eyes closed? Because that could mean the mom doesn't want to see, or right? But that sort of thing that people do, okay, now I need to center and go inside and quiet down. It's like repping really isn't, you don't need to work. Just not that much work. So the instructions for really new people is often helpful, just hands by your sides and your eyes open. Nice neutral position. Start to notice what you're experiencing. Okay? That closing and going inside thing is actually, it's a systemic move that if we're imposing it as a representative, can be really unhelpful. And then asking a representative to look at another representative that they might not otherwise look at. That is a move that one does from time to time. I'm not saying this is something you should do all the time, but very often, the not looking, not seeing, it can be, let's just say you two are representatives, I'm a representative, and I'm not looking, and the facilitator asks me, and I say, yeah, I don't see them or whatever. There can be a very useful sentence, something along the lines of, I don't want to see, or I don't want to be part of this, or depending upon what's going on. There can be a point where you actually say, I know you don't want to look at Jeff's representative, but just go ahead and do it. Just do it on manual. So then we do it. We both do it on manual. And there's this discovery, I can look. Right? No, it doesn't always unfold that way. Please don't misunderstand me. But it's just a nice example of you're both following the representatives and you're leading them and asking them to try things and see what happens. And a lot of the time, so someone will say, I don't want to look at them. And you go, okay, they don't want to look at them. But you don't have to, you can acknowledge that and respect that, but you don't have to obey that, right? And often it's an extremely beautiful and simple movement. Noticing, oh, we can look at each other. And all of that crap I had about not looking, about how scary that would be, or how hard that would be, or how dangerous that would be, it's turning out to be like, oh, okay. So I just wanted that. Then what I was doing over here, I think with Katerina, a lot of people get their information, most people get their information in little shorthands, right? So what are you experiencing? All of them, ugh. Well, to me, I've communicated something, but with the facilitator, I really haven't communicated very much. She's got a feeling for it, right? But, you can't just let that be. You say, okay, great. Could you give that a few words, right? Well, what, and it may be hard for me because I've it's a gestalt that I've just expressed, right?
Mhm.
I expressed the whole thing, but even I don't know what I totally mean by what I just expressed. And what you're constantly trying to do with constellations is get to some core underneath. If we keep on staying at the surface level reportage, yeah, we don't have much to work with. Yeah. So when we got to what was Katerina's role, like angry at them, or did she think they were angry at her, or what actually was the experience? And when we got, I feel like I'm being judged. Okay, that's information. I now know what the interaction is feeling like from her point of view in that moment. But just like, I don't know what that is. I don't. Is it they're dangerous? Or I don't want to see. You know what? It could be 15 things. So please don't just take all your reports at surface value. If you don't know what it means, what someone's just said, you need to ask a little bit more. And sometimes you need to give them a little, they may need 2 or 3 minutes. I don't know what that means yet. Give me a second. Okay.
Do you encourage the facilitator suggesting words or feelings like that?
I will do that. Mostly, just to give a few examples. So like in this situation, is it like you're judging them or they're judging you, or, you know, and I'm going along with some of my sense of what means. And if you set up the right tone in your constellation, they'll say to you, no, it's not about judgment. What is it about? And they'll keep searching.
Mm-hmm.
It's really about danger or what, right? Yeah. Usually suggesting, as long as you've created the right tone in your group around making sure representatives are honest with you, that they're not merely complying, and that, little things like, would you say this? And they say it, and you're like, is that ringing true? Or if you need to fix it, please fix it. Or is it okay to say that? Just these little prompts that say, there are things I want you to try and say, but I need to know if they land for you. I'm relying on you to let me know what's landing here. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. This gets us into the other thing that we could talk for a long time about. Need some water? Go ahead and get yourself some water. What I call the double consciousness of representing. And this is really important because a lot of representatives do not understand this, and you really need to help them with it. But it's actually what makes representing really useful. Not simply the field perception, which obviously vary. And I'll go more into representing at another time, but I do want to name this. The field perception is really important. Other things are really important. But the fact that whenever you're representing something, you are still also being yourself. And this is very useful. You bring a whole set of resources that, let's say you're representing someone's father, the father doesn't have, right? But if you're just being you, thinking about the constellation, you don't have representatives, resources that the father has. So it's almost like while you represent, you've got this dialogue going on. If you're representing father, it is not about just diving into father. And this is what a lot of people new to representing don't understand, particularly in the Bay Area, where a lot of catharsis-oriented work is highly valued. Primal scream, I'm going to bring all my feelings, all that sort of stuff, right? We want you to go into father and still be yourself. I'm going to say a lot more about this. This is what, if someone's really starting to go into someone who suffered and died, and they're taking up a lot of attention and emotional energy right now because they're tapping into enormous suffering, like you want to stop that. it's not useful for the whole constellation. Like, it already happened. It doesn't need to happen again. Yeah. So moderating the experience, you want to have full access to it and have people to be able to go into it, but you want them to also maintain a sense of themselves. And this is the place from where you can make a direction, like, I want you to make the next healing move. Father may not be able to do that, right? And you'll say, you know, in your loyalty to the Father, you would go, no, absolutely not. Not until my father apologizes or whatever, right? But as a representative and kind of a partnership with the Father, you actually can, like, Father knows what the next healing move is, and you're the one who can kind of help him be okay with doing it, maybe. Yeah? So anyway, I wanted to lift that up in terms of that interaction we had right here. And I'm going to speak tons more about representing, because that's its own worthy topic. Again, Francesca Mason-Boring says, this is one of her things, we just need the information.
Not the drama.
Exactly. Now, by that, we don't mean necessarily emotionless. We don't mean information in the sense of, you know, data. Because feelings are information too, right? And we want to include feelings. Yeah, okay. But sometimes this loyalty thing develops around when you're in a role, and I need to show. There were several times last night, I don't know if you noticed, but people raising their hands, and I assume they have new information, and they just need to say the thing they said 15 minutes earlier. Like, you already said that. But they're like, I need some attention. I need to include this, sort of thing. They get a real loyalty field around the representations, and then it becomes about the representative rather than about the client. Yeah.
Or the dynamic.
Or the dynamic, or yeah. Okay. So I wanted to say a word about that. And then lastly, about Jeff's thing about, I don't know if it's if I'm representing the country or the place I came from. This is such a slippery slope. Firm rule. End of story. Very rare exceptions. There are exceptions, but very rare. Trust the role. By this, I mean whatever you wrote on the card, or but if the client chose, would you please be my mother, and you step into the mother, trust that we're dealing with the mother. If Poland's written in the card, trust we're dealing with Poland. Once you start asking the question, well, now I don't know if it's we said it was your mother, but maybe it's your mother's mother, you are now in chaos land. You are now, like, you've gone off the deep end. And so clients will sometimes have this, so you just need to reassure them, don't worry about that. Your mom. We said you were mom and your mom. Now, this is weird information that's coming through mom right now that feels really weird, but somehow it's what's needing to come through about mom right now. Okay? If you worry about things like roles jumping in some way, then we can't do constellations. It's just chaos. The exceptions are things like, I go over to her and I say, let's say something like, what would be a good example? You're the part of the client that can't see what's going on. I mean, who's blind to what's going on? I mean, wouldn't see what's going on if, all of a sudden I've assigned the role in a very muddy way. So it's then you may not be able to trust the role because it got assigned in a very muddy kind of a way. So the more you can be clear about the roles, obviously, that's really helpful. What this does Like last night, I was so cranky. Because there can be kind of a funny drift in roles. And I hate even bringing up this example, but last night was a really good one where I brought in proper motherhood and proper fatherhood. And, we have a sense of that, like it's an archetype. It is a sealed in resource, right? Yeah. It came in and it was not able to stabilize. The system was not able to stabilize those meetings, given the mother and father this family actually had. So I just asked those two roles to sit down after a while. Because really what was showing up was the meaning of mother and father in this family system. Yeah. So there are examples of this. But so few of them. And the reason why you can trust it, this is so important. I was just having an argument on Facebook about this. What are we representing? When you have mom or dad or Poland, are you meeting the actual mother and father and actual Poland? There are people with differences. Everyone's so I'm going to name, there are differences of opinion about this, and you get to have your opinion about this. This is Leslie's opinion. We are not literally representing mother or father or Poland. We are representing the meaning of the role in the client's system. Okay. So for instance, the Constellation we already did with the countries, we didn't have an absolute encounter with the United States and Chile and Germany. What we ran into were some meanings of those countries in this group, in this system. Right? Okay. The place I really came to understand this was for a while there I was doing a lot of business-related constellations, and people like to constellate themselves in money. Right? We all got money issues. So we bring in a representative for the client, a representative for money. And money would start doing wacko things. Like giving you the finger, running out of the room, expressing rage, all kinds of things, right? And they would say, is that what money is really like? And I'm like, of course not.
It's neutral.
Money is just money, right? I don't know if money's neutral. Money is always embedded in meanings and culture. There is no neutral money. But in terms of the money that's showing up, this is the meaning in your system. So if money is hostile, then it's hostile for you. It doesn't mean it's in some abstract and absolute sense hostile. No? And then I began to think, if that's true of money, maybe it's true of everything. So we're not running into your mother, we're running into the meaning of money, mother in your system. The meaning of Poland in your system. The meaning of World War II in your system. I find this to be very, very important. Because then whatever shows up, even if it's counterintuitive, if it contradicts the official story in the client's family system, the example I always offer up is mother and father fought your whole life. You bring in representatives from mother and father. The first thing they do is dive into each other's arms and say, I love this person. And the client nudges me in the ribs and says, that's not what it was like. And I say, so I'm sitting here thinking, how could it be true? And I say, what if the fighting was the only way to express this love? It was the only way they knew to show their bond. Because if we start watching the representative from mother and father and say, oh crap, something's wrong. We're not getting the right information here. It's not accurate. It's not historically accurate. Again, we can't do constellations. Like we're done. We're toast. The good thing about constellations is that those new meanings are actually the reframes we're looking for. We're trying to understand what the fuck. What the hell is going on in this family system? And the client who hears I wonder if your parents fighting was the only way they knew how to show love for each other. They now have a whole new relationship with their parents. We can almost end the constellation right there. We've just done a big upgrade in their experience of themselves, their life, and their relationship with their parents, right? So this is good news. This is really, really good news. And then the last thing I'll say about this before I dive into some more of the nuts and boltsy material of the morning is the reason why we get tempted to forget this, and I will warn you because this will happen to you, is that constellations can be so flippin' literal. Like, oh my God, that's my mom's mannerisms. Mm-hmm. Oh my God, she just used the kind of words my mom used, right? Which is very frustrating to me because it tempts us all to think about it very literally, right?
And you kind of leave the big picture.
Right. So constellations can be very literal. I'll give a very good example of this at the Australasian intensive where I did a constellation for someone. Gradually, over the course of the constellation, what seemed to come through was that her mother's father had a child outside of the marriage that was not part of the client's historical knowledge about the family. So this means mom's got a brother she doesn't know about, and the client's got an uncle she doesn't know about. Now, what I said at the end, and it was beautiful, it had an excellent effect on her to have this and it just arose. I turned to her and say, I really need, this is going to be hard, but I need to say this. I don't know if your grandfather has another child out there as a result of this constellation. Please don't go home to your mom and say, I think you have a brother out there somewhere, right? I don't know. The meaning of an extra child out there who was not acknowledged seems to be part of your system connected to your mom and your mom's dad. But I don't know if this is literally the story. And I ask you to have some softness around that. And it was great because she was a very sophisticated representative and facilitator herself. And at the end of it, when she was thanking everybody, she says, and I'm so glad to discover my metaphorical uncle. I mean, she really got it. She really understood what I was trying to say. So being able to sort of work with the literal quality of things and the metaphorical quality of things, but it saves us because then, when mom shows up with behaviors that are just not like an abusive mother who shows up as really congruently loving to the client, which can be very upsetting to the client, understandably, right? We're going to assume that the constellation's trying to show us something that's really, really important. We have to take our time and slow down and see, what's important about it. Okay? Everyone got that bit? Trust the roll, trust the roll, trust the roll. Yeah. Without, unless you have overwhelming reasons to feel like, oh, there's been some meaning drift here. Okay, yeah.
I think the confusion for me was I felt like I was representing the United States, and I really was. That was the role. Mm-hmm. And so I was asking, well, am I just coming from myself, or am I really doing it wrong? But turned out it was both. Right. Normally in a constellation, you're not really you've never really been the thing you're representing.
Right.
So it's easier to distinguish.
Right. So in that circumstance, number one, could have been wrong, you could have been Chile. We have those kinds of inversions all the time. We're watching a blind constellation and there are all these reversals going on, which is classic constellation stuff, right? So that's number one. Number two, you're representing the United States. You're representing what's on the card. That you're having a resonance with it. That's possible, right? Anyone here could, because we're all here in the United States now. there's something about when a client starts to go, I don't know if I'm having my, that sort of thing. It makes the whole system a little worried about what we're up to. So I encourage you to redirect that sort of stuff when you can, a little bit, just in terms of, just report what you're experiencing. The other thing is that very frequently representatives and or clients will be having thoughts about the process, which mostly we're not interested in. We want to be in rapport with and not make wrong, but is mostly tends to be a distraction. We want to stay with the experiences that are coming through. Yeah. Which, by the way, is one of my challenges as a facilitator, because as you can tell, I'm extremely verbal. Yeah. There are formats out there where there's no talking, they're completely silent. This is a good correction for me to do on occasion. I did that a little bit here. I just asked people to do a couple of healing moves, and I didn't talk. I didn't ask people to talk very much. It can be very helpful to just stop the talk a little bit and invite people just into the somatic experience. Okay, so I want to actually try and dive on, as usual, I'm a bit behind. But I want to dive into some of the basic introductory material I want to get to today. And I'm going to try to go through this at kind of a logical sequence of things. So I'm going to start out with a short talk on kind of the reality of our ancestors, cross-generational trauma, and entanglements. And in shorthand, it's ancestors, trauma, whoops, there's a U in there, and entanglements. This is like bread and butter constellation stuff, okay? So the first thing to just remember here is our source with Bert Hellinger. And his primary source, but by no means his only source, Zulu elders in South Africa. So for those of you who don't know this history, Bert Hellinger spent 20 years, he was a Roman Catholic priest, German Roman Catholic priest, who spent 20 years in South Africa, okay, in mission. And I'm pretty sure at some point he had an initiation with Zulu shaman type elders, who, like many indigenous folk, had a system for relating to the ancestors and helping people be in good relationship with the ancestors, and kind of taking this all totally for granted, right? So they have what we would call today a technology around that he got exposed to. The notion that the ancestors really aren't dead, that they're alive, that they're relevant, that they affect us. In traditional and indigenous cultures, this is really just taken for granted, that you can chat with your dead aunt, blah, 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 right? Examples abound. Day of the Dead rituals. You go to the cemeteries and you have a picnic with the dead. Shinto ancestral worship shrines. You feed them rice and oranges, and you leave that there. In more indigenous cultures, shamanic cultures, there are numerous approaches to just the conventions of the ancestors are real and they're an issue. In the same way that getting along with your neighbors in your apartment building is an issue, right? There are people you run into, you got to deal with, they leave their laundry in the lawn, whatever it is, right? Your ancestors are the same. And so we need to be tidy in our relationship with the ancestors. Yeah? And they have a technology for dealing with that. That was his first source. And then he came to West Germany, came back to, yeah, at the time it was West Germany, I assume, yeah, still West Germany, where his context was reconciliation between Jews and Germans. And he dove into the exploding humanistic psychology scene of the 70s and all of those, NLP and Gestalt and Virginia Satir and transactional analysis. You want to find out about all that, there are resources to find out about all that. And then he eventually came to this synthesis called family constellations work. Also, just a little bit interesting, of course, Bert Hellinger was essentially a teenager in World War II. He was in the Hitler Youth. He's very, very much touched by the entire Nazi experience. It's a big part of who he is, and working that out as part of the field of family constellations. So, in this context, the ancestors are real and relevant. For people closer to their indigenous or traditional roots, and I use indigenous to mean people who more or less have not left their land, or in some ways have been able to stay in contact with their indigenous relationships to the land. By traditional, there's gray areas here, but modern cultures which nonetheless function quite traditionally. For instance, until more recently, in large areas of Italy and Poland, in a lot of areas, they just have much more homogeneous and traditionally oriented cultures. So the folk ways are still pretty intact. It's becoming less and less of a case. But in those environments, the sense of the ancestors being real and relevant is pretty accessible. Again, I come back to the, Northern European American mutt. This stuff is, I know this and I believe this somatically. It's something that I don't always feel. It's been at least a 10-year journey of finding the knobs on feeling this for myself, because it's so disrupted for that class of people. It's really hard to feel. So again, if you have clients like me, it's something worth, it feels very abstract and theoretical. Very nice idea, but come on, right? Okay. This exists in a field, now we're into some technical language, of connection or information field, networks, right? That is, in technical language, non-local. It spans space and time. So we can represent someone who's been dead 100 years. Or we can represent someone who's nowhere in the room, not in the room, right? We have access to something that's non-local, right? None of this would matter very much if we didn't get into trouble, which is the reason why we do constellation. And from the constellations point of view, the reason why we're doing this is that there's a history of unresolved, unintegrated, undealt with trauma. Okay. So the baby who died while they were running from the, from the Russians, and they had no time to bury it or to grieve it. The brother who stole all the money from the other brother and leaving the family destitute. Obviously, big things like slavery, Cherokee Walk of Tears, Armenian genocide, the Holocaust, right? That these events happen, they take place, and for whatever reason, the family could not integrate or honor or deal with or include this. And so it remains as an issue. And this is how we define personal trauma as well. It's an event that was too overwhelming for the system to integrate at the time. It's the difference between a bad thing you get over and a trauma that sticks, right? And the unresolvedness, the things that are excluded, the secrets, the grief that didn't get grieved, the transgression that didn't get acknowledged, all that stuff remains in this field of connection that is non-local around the ancestors that are real and relevant, okay? This is what Constellations is mostly interested in. Our culture, due to our recent psychological history, is mostly interested in what we might call psychodynamics. Now, there's some overlap here. Okay, this is why understanding basic psychodynamics is very useful. Knowing a bit of your Freud and your Jung and your, that sort of stuff. But the kind of thing where someone says, you say, well, what was up with your mom? What was the deal with her? And you say, well, she was really unhappy because she never got to go to college. Now, that's a real thing. It matters. It's important. But it's really not what Constellations is generally looking at. Right? And people are loaded up walking around with these stories. We're highly trained. We're really good at telling stories about our families, about how we are the way we are, that match this way of thinking. And very often with your clients, they're going to want to, and you say, tell me about your family lineage, and they'll start doing this. Well, mom was codependent and, right? And it's all good. There's nothing wrong with it. Yeah? The problem is it doesn't have systemic impact unless it is connected to this. So when you and I hear mom didn't get to go to college,
why?
We hear millennia of patriarchy at work. And maybe mothers who had to bury their dreams.
Or financial hardness.
There could be a financial betrayal of some sort, yeah? So it's not that it's irrelevant information, but by and large, this is where people go, and the more they have this kind of a story, unfortunately, the more stuck they tend to be. Because this story explains why I'm depressed, and it's got no version of how I get out. It's got by and large, Freud stumbled on this talking therapy in that he'd have someone start to talk about their history and about, their father beating them up when they were a kid. And to his amazement, symptoms would go away. This is what it was called the talking cure. And then after a while, it stopped happening, or not as much as he thought. And the reason being that the story about how I got depressed in my family, or my father beat me up, we never had enough as a kid, and I still struggle with relationships because of my father. At the end of this, what can you offer that person? You can't fix the dad. You can't fix what happened. You can't fix the fact that they're now in a habit about it, right? Yeah. But if we're in the space of transgenerational, unresolved trauma, and we can set up a field that's in connection with the ancestors who are real and relevant, then we can actually go back and grieve that thing that didn't get grieved. We can include that one who got lost. We can have the one who is at fault to stand up and say, it's me, I did that. And everything changes. Yeah? So these psychodynamic stories, there's a trick to interviewing and helping people get unhooked from this. You need to be careful with yourself to the degree that you get fascinated with these things, because this is what we're on the lookout for. And I'm going to teach you a little bit about interviewing, I hope, this weekend, so that you can get a sense for how to have an eye for this rather than for this in and of itself. Because this is the stuff we can do something about in constellations. And you felt it last night when we had that really a critical role for the aspect of the client which had been afraid that she was going to go crazy. And when she was able to name, I could have gone crazy, and I've split that part of myself off, but I'm going to let it be present now. And that was like, if you know, when you look at a constellation later and you notice, oh, where are the 2 or 3 or 4 places where something really shifted or moved? Yeah, that was one of the big ones in the constellation. The naming of the possibility of someone maybe almost having gone crazy, which would what? Make them like their parents in that particular constellation, right? So I can't admit that. I can't be friendly with that part of myself. I can't even see that it's actually got a resource because it was taking care of me in some way. Yeah. Once we were able to include that, yeah, all the other actors started to feel a little bit better. Not only because that was a crucial piece that needed to be included, they begin to get role modeled like, wow, we can include these pieces, right? Okay, so this is what makes constellations work. The last thing I want to say about this then is in this context, and this is going to take us into the next topic. Given this, that we all have this in our families, this is going on, we feel it mostly unconsciously. Yeah? Where does that leave us? We reach back to help, aka belong. Because to help is to belong. And this is what we call entanglement. Okay. So we pop into our families and we feel that there's a Holocaust back there, or there's a, slavery back there, or whatever it is. And it all should, it's both at the level of what we would call the field, but also all the ways our parents parent us, right? All the psychodynamics of the way in which our parents parent us is going to be reflecting all of this and how the family is managed to adapt to this experience, yeah? And we go, oh, I'll help. Yeah? And then I'll belong. Yeah? So if several generations of my European Jewish ancestors have been depressed because of all the suffering they experienced, I'll feel really innocent, and I'll get to that more in a second, and belong to them by joining them in the depression and making sure I don't feel too happy, which will give them company and make them feel chipper and happy, and then they'll feel better, and then I'll feel better. It's brilliant. Unfortunately, all it does is make you depressed because this stuff already happened. Yeah. And this is really loaded with magical thinking about what we can do to prevent these things that happen, or fix, or in some way heal them. So a quotation. It's one of my favorite quotations from Love's Hidden Symmetry. If you want to write this down, it's page 111. Children are boundless in love, but limited in life experience. So it's a great temptation for them to unite with their parents in suffering. Isn't that beautiful? Children are boundless in love, but limited in life experience. So it's a great temptation for them to unite with their parents, and we could say, and ancestors in suffering. One more time, children are boundless in love, but limited in life experience. So it's a great temptation for them to unite with their parents in suffering. I'll just finish out the paragraph. If a mother is depressed, her children feel tempted to be depressed as well. If a father drinks too much, his children come under pressure to find some way to emulate his suffering, perhaps by failing to be successful in life. But maturing love, that's us, right? But maturing love demands that children gradually give up the blind love of childhood and learn to love as adults. Instead of repeating what is harmful, mature love demands that they free themselves from the family entanglements. Then they fulfill their parents' deeper expectations and hopes for their children. The better the children are, the better are the parents. Yeah. And this is the thing we're, wanting to do by intervening in all this. Obviously, that's not the story people have. Yeah. If you read that to a client, they would say, "Screw you, that's not what my family's like. They don't want it better for me." Right? We do understand. Okay. So this leads us into a topic that is kind of tricky business, but once you get it, it's really, really critical. Let's go straight into it. Topic is conscience and belonging. And this is truly a signature. A lot of what Bert Hellinger offered up was kind of a synthesis. Not hugely original in its elements. It's kind of the way he put things together. But this piece is mostly recognized by people as a signature original contribution. Some water. Okay. So, you want to know how to feel innocent? You ready? Innocence follows belonging. And guilt follows exclusion, or not belonging. Now, obviously, we're not talking about super conventional versions of guilt and innocence here, okay? And yet it does contribute to that as well. The old saying is that the child of thieves who steals does not feel guilty. No. The child of thieves who steals does not feel guilty. He belongs to thieves. Belongs to, yeah. Fits with the mores and the patterns, and yeah. The child of thieves who does not steal feels guilty. Yeah. So the degree that you arrange for your belonging in your family, including, by the way, for feeling not, I have so many clients that say, "No, I don't feel like I belong to my family." I'm guessing that's the way you belong to your family, is by not belonging. And their eyes go wide. To the degree that you arrange somehow, like to be depressed like your mom, to drink like your dad, from the example we just read from, right? Yeah. Imagine the guilt of the grandchild, and I keep coming back to this, mostly because it's such a contemporaneous example. We actually have conscious access to this. In other versions, it's more unconscious, but these are conscious. The grandchild of Holocaust survivors who has a great life. How can they stand the guilt of that? How can they endure it? They're safe, they're well, they're prosperous, nobody oppresses them, they're not in any kind of trouble, right? The guilt would be, and this is where the notion of survivor guilt is very, very useful. All of us, this is one way to talk about this, is like we're all suffering from survivor guilt. and the notion that we have it, how dare we have it better than our ancestors. Yeah. If we lived in Syria, we'd be dealing with different issues because they do not have it better than their ancestors right now. But most of us here now, most of us have it better than our ancestors. This is a new frame for understanding how and why people act the way that they do, and takes it out of the frame of moralism. So, and the reason why this became so important to Bert Hellinger, of course, in his context, was discovering that most Nazis did it with a clean conscience. There wasn't some hidden, sense of having done something wrong underneath it. Now, for some there was, and that would be discovered at great cost later on. People will do horrendous things in good conscience. If you want to look at, I think, a far more useful view on what's going on in America and red versus blue and Trump versus non-Trump is this frame. And the power of belonging and what it does for people and what people will do in the name of belonging with a totally clean conscience. And what this does for us is it gives us a frame for working with families that have all kinds of stuff, nutty stuff going on in them, from a non-judgmental frame. Yeah? Instead of saying who's good and who's bad in this family, which is kind of wrapped up in this, we're going to ask, how has belonging been managed in this family, and how have they been having a hard time with that? Okay. So that when we look at victims and perpetrators, we're not starting from the place of how do we figure out how to punish the bad guys here and get everybody blaming the bad guys, which is probably already happening anyway. Right? And what we find, and this is something that when I'm going to do a whole module on victims and perpetrators, but when we can come in with a fair bit of lack of judgment about this, then resolution of trauma, something becomes available. People aren't in their positions trying to defend themselves anymore systemically, right? And there is a place for conscience here, and I'll get to that in a moment. Now, with respect to this, however, you may be asking, belonging to what? I belong to a lot of things. Classic American dilemma on Sunday morning. Do I go to church or do I take my kid to a soccer game? We've all got these different belongings going on, right? Religion, neighborhood, family, new family, right? I mean, this is the challenge of someone who's newly married, trying to manage shifting around belongings now, yeah? Or blended families, God help us, the challenges they have around managing the experience, yeah? Work, yes, work, all these kinds of things. Nationality, I belong to the Marines, Semper Fi, whatever it is, yeah? And so you're in the middle of all this, so you're in the middle of this, you belong to all of these at different times and in different ways. And then they come into conflict, like church and soccer on Sunday morning. Yeah? Now, the good news about church and soccer on Sunday morning is it forces you to clarify your values, right? Which stimulates growth. You know what? Soccer is really important for my kids, but one of my big identities as a parent is providing a reliable Christian frame for my children to grow up with, and it's got to come first. Or, you know what? I believe in a version of Christianity that's got a lot of room in it, and as a parent, I want my kids' interests to come first. We're doing soccer. Now, we're neutral about that, but that person's got to clarify. Now, most people don't take the time. They just choose one based upon the pressures involved. Oh, the spouse said you got to go to the soccer game, and so you just gave up. You're not clarifying anything, right? You're just hanging out in the mud of it. But the good news is that these pressures give you an opportunity to clarify your values. And let me give you a really good example. There are children of thieves who don't steal. How did that happen? If belonging is innocence, how does it ever happen that anyone leaves the mafia? Right? What they noticed was that there was a circle of belonging that had certain values around stealing, some kind of sort of Western Judeo-Christian tradition of how we act in the world. That's important, that they belong to, and they've decided is a value for them. And so they start living by that one rather than the stealing of their family. So having different belongings is actually, it's complicated, it's difficult, it puts us against ourselves. When it comes to interfaith families deciding what to do on Christmas, all this stuff, it's very difficult. It's very nice to be part of that traditional culture I just talked about, that homogeneous village in Italy where everybody does the same thing. This is why leading something like the Amish is so hard for kids to do. Because there's congruence. There's none of this conflict. And that feels good. And I think that it's fair to say our modern life poses us with too many belonging choices. It's overwhelming. None of us can figure out how to, where to belong or what to belong to, yeah? So, but this is the thing that is often underlooked in constellation work and what generates change. Okay? Because what is often fueling the stuckness for the client is they're only noticing this little bit of belonging. So again, back to my example, and this is again unconscious, the Holocaust, which has got a very powerful field around it, by the way. Events like this do. Yeah. And like all of their sense or a great proportion of their sense of belonging and innocence and purpose and value is bound up with this. But they stay depressed and semi-suicidal and lonely and right? In constellations, what we can do is open up other areas of belonging that make some room. So again, from last night, excellent example. We were just having this conversation. This is very confidential, but basically her father's a bit of a monster. And throughout the entire interview we were having, both of us were presupposing what we were going to be constellating mostly was her relationship with her father. It was obvious. Right? And a very strong field around it. And about 2/3 of the way through the interview, said, I've got kind of a bonkers idea. Because she was like, I don't know, I don't want to. She was really getting upset about it. I said, I have a bonkers idea. I'm wondering about doing a constellation in which we don't have your father at all at this point. Which, believe me, if you were doing this interview, it's not necessarily what would have occurred to you because it's the obvious issue. Yeah? And she just immediately calmed down. Okay? Okay. So we didn't even in any explicit way include this. It showed up on its own, right? Not very explicitly, enough so the client could stay in the game. What did we bring in? Her siblings. Which is another circle. I mean, they're overlapping circles of belonging because they're both family. After all, they're all also children of this man. But it opened up something enough that felt safe enough that she could identify with a bit more. And then, what did we do at the very end? We brought in Yggdrasil. We brought in some kind of ancient druid ancestral resource that she could also belong to. Yeah. A lot of our dilemmas, the dilemmas, of our clients, is because that particular issue, a relationship issue, a work issue, a money issue, or whatever, its belonging circle has gotten so narrowed to one sphere that there's no way for it to shift or move in any way. Because to do anything different, to have a different experience other than this depression or this anxiety or whatever, will become a violation, a disloyalty to this belonging. So instead of making the person disloyal to this relationship, we just notice that there's some other relationships. There are other belongings. And now we've got some movement. Someday we will go back to that relationship with Dad and deal a little bit more in the way I was talking about here, which is addressing the trauma by including or grieving or acknowledging or whatever. Between you and me, again, very confidential, he's a closeted gay man, which made him a very destructive person in his family. But we all can immediately feel compassion for that oppression, that closeting thing. And where I would end up going is, how do we acknowledge and include and honor the generations of men and women who have had to lie about themselves and families about who they are in some very deep and serious way. But I couldn't do that because that just would have talked her more into this, which right now is feeling way too unsafe. She couldn't deal with that yet. She couldn't even deal with us being compassionate towards her father. It's just too hard. Yeah. So we opened up. So this is a very important thing. That conscience is a function of belonging. When we belong, we feel innocent and we have clear conscience. Okay. Here's what I want to do. How are you guys doing? How's your energy? I've been talking for a while.
Getting a little low.
Yeah. So we've got 25 minutes till lunch. Is that okay? Does that feel like a stretch you guys can do?
Yeah.
Yeah? Because here's what I want to do. I want to go through the orders of, it would just, I think, be really useful for us if I got basically what you're getting is the 101 stuff here. By the way, useful to be getting the 101 stuff built up in this way. Fields, ancestors, conscience, and belonging. Okay. Is I want to now do the orders of love for a key topic. I'm going to send you off to lunch to forget all about it for an hour and a half. Okay? Mm-hmm. So eyes on the prize. Think about lunch. It's going to be in 25 minutes. And you can power through for 25 minutes. Then what we're going to do is we're going to come back with the people who are going to be joining us, and I'm going to do a constellation for somebody. Okay? So we'll go into practice. Okay, so the last is the orders of love. I know how to say this in German, but you can pronounce it better than I can. Katharina?
Ordnung der Liebe.
Ordnung der Liebe. Now I'm just going to make a point for families. This is really important. We have other systems we look at. The orders of love vary a little bit from system to system. Okay? This is actually really important because people come into businesses and try and apply the orders of love with respect to families in business environments, and they cause all kinds of problems. So, orders of love are basically, if you don't like the word orders, a lot of English speakers don't like that word. You can call them patterns or rhythms. Also, patterns of love, rhythms of love, arrangements of love a little bit. But basically what they are is the general principle of healthy working family systems. Okay? So these patterns are what families have when they're doing okay. And therefore, it's what systems are coping with when they're not present, right? So when one of these is out of order, that's what the family system is trying to compensate for, with depression, with suicidality, with whatever, okay? this, actually, I'm going to go through the list first. So the first thing I just want to say is that for a guy who thinks systemically, Bert Hellinger is not very systemic. That is, he's not a very orderly thinker himself, which is interesting. He would have made a terrible engineer. And so he actually doesn't have a list of these. He doesn't have procedures or lists or anything. You will not find a single book of his that is like that. They're case studies, they're poetry, they're records of talks, but him kind of laying out what he teaches. His followers did that for him. They listened, they paid attention, and then they wrote those books. Nonetheless, this is the important book. So this list is not definitive. If you look at different people, you will see the list described in slightly different ways. Okay? So the first one, from my point of view, is honoring what is. And in some sense, all the others could come under this rubric. If grieving is honoring what is, acknowledging trespasses is honoring what is, yeah. There was a book in which I really liked this phrase, which is respecting reality. What is, how it is, what happened. Huh? Which I think is quite nice. I remember that wasn't years ago, it was in Australia last year with Stefan Hausner. Put that name up, it's another one. And he was working with a woman who had an adult disabled daughter. Daughter had been disabled her whole life and was now an adult. And she was trying to figure out some things that were going on in the family. And so they set it up. And what started to come through in the constellation was that the whole family was trying to figure out how to deal with the fact that the client, the mother, was taking too much responsibility for everything. Was trying to make things right. There's a disabled daughter in the household. How do I make sure that people suffer the least and get along the most? And my poor daughter, that she's okay, and da-da-da. Like the whole family was going nuts with trying to deal with this mother who was trying to make everything right in a context in which there are some things she could not make right. Yeah. And so one part, Stefan's very direct, there are all kinds of styles, turned to her and said, I'm curious. It doesn't seem like you have a very good relationship with fate. And of course, clients sit down here expecting facilitators to fix things, not respect fate. Like, fix it, right? But she was an advanced facilitator herself, so she was, one part of her, you could tell, was going, what the fuck? And another part was going, what? And he said, you have a disabled daughter. You're a mother of a disabled daughter. This is part of your fate. What's your relationship to that like? And you could see the error messages going off, like, I don't get it. I thought I was supposed to fix that. I'm really confused. But it was starting to kind of land. Yeah. And then he did some moves in the constellation where he basically enacted a little bit of that mother kind of accepting the fate of the daughter. Everybody felt better, especially the daughter. Right? Right? But this, for anyone in the room who's a mother or father, you get why this mother was in this place. The last thing you want to do is respect the reality of a child suffering. right? You just, the last thing, like, no, I got to fix that. I got to make that better. I've got to, right? Right? Okay, so very big. Belonging. We've been here a little bit already, but with respect to families, it's different in other systems. This is why this is a really important one. In families, it's inevitable. Whatever family you get born into, you belong to, it's permanent. End of story. You can't get suicided out, forgotten about, died early out, written out of the will out, not invited to Thanksgiving dinner out. Belonging is, you can't yourself move off to California when you're 22 and give the finger to your parents and unbelong. You always belong to your family system and all the ancestors in the family soul to which you belong. The problem, of course, is in real life, people get lost and excluded and forgotten and estranged and die and all this stuff. So what happens in families where, once again, this hasn't been integrated in for whatever reason, okay, that lostness is not somehow couldn't be dealt with, right, or wasn't, yeah, then the system is going to try and figure out how to correct this. This is what I was saying. When these orders are out of order, the system tries to compensate so much. And then we are the ones who raise our hands to re-include them. So we will have their suffering. We will have their problem, right? We will, yeah. Classic story is a man grows up with a really bad, neglectful, abusive father. He has a son. He doesn't want his son to have any relationship with his neglectful, awful, alcoholic, philandering father. Son grows up, doesn't hear much about his grandfather, and what little he hears is disrespectful. Guess what he starts doing when he hits 18? Becoming like his grandfather. He starts drinking and getting in trouble and hanging out, and the father's going, I don't get it. I tried to keep this influence from happening to my son. But the son is reaching out to re-include grandfather. Everyone belongs. Well, we can find a way for everyone to belong incongruent in good ways, which in that instance would not be, going to Thanksgiving dinner with the abusive, difficult grandfather, but it would be, number one, the father having a good place in his heart for his father in some way or another. And then secondly, being able to say, you know what, I have a father, he's your grandfather. I can't have you hang out with him now because he's not totally safe, but I want you to respect. Without him, we wouldn't be here. No? Maybe I'm in a picture of him on the wall. These kinds of things, yeah. Yeah. So, and then the kid isn't going to try and re-include him in his own life. Right? Okay, so belonging. Seniority, again, much more simple in family systems than they are in other kinds of symptoms, almost entirely about who comes first. So parents are bigger than children. They come before the children. Now, this is something that there's been some misunderstanding about. The question could be seniority about what, right? In organizations, you don't just say, Jeff's senior to Maria Elena. Is it, in what context is he senior to you, right? Does he have seniority to you in terms of, budgeting decisions? Or in terms of management decisions? Maybe one of you has seniority and one of you, those and so on, yeah? So there's a little bit of role thing here. What we're talking about here is who gives life to who. In which case it is pretty simple, right? Parents give birth to children, not the other way around. Older siblings are a little bit senior to the children who come next. And think about it. The kids who come next screw it up for the older kids. The older kids have a little bit of seniority in the system because they came first, okay? This is something you've seen a gabillion times in constellations, the client finally sitting down and being able to be small to their parent and how when done at the right time, it feels better to everybody. Yeah. This is not the same. It does not equal role. And I kind of want to need, or even strictly speaking, decision making. The son in the family is a heart surgeon, and one of their siblings is having heart problems, and their mother and their brother have different opinions about what surgery to do. You're going to do what the heart surgeon brother recommends, not what the mother who, was a librarian says, right? And I really don't want to misunderstand this. Someday, if your mother is incontinent and in a nursing home and you need to change her diapers and you need to make her financial decisions for her, you should do this. You can still hold her as senior to you in life. Dear mother, you came first. You gave me life, right? And now I can care for you because I have some resources. And I'm a good son and I will do this for you. There's often a misunderstanding in certain constellation circles about, because of seniority, we can't help our parents. Mm-hmm. And it's not about not being able to help, but the stance of the helping is really where it's coming from, right?
I think the trouble is when kids are in a role where they actually are the parents. No?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. All that stuff. So, yeah. Okay. 2 more, and then off to lunch. Balance of giving and taking. This is mostly in peer relationships. The big place this shows up in is in obviously romantic relationships. Yeah, husbands and wives, romantic relationships, co-parents. Also, this is a dynamic that I'm not going to get into now that will show up a lot in businesses where someone's giving too much and someone's taking too much and it's making things out of balance. But basically what systems want is an all-around balance of giving and taking. The sort of exception to this is that parents give and children take. This is the correct thing. Even in this situation, yeah, there's nothing that can ever match the parents giving us our lives. So in that sense, we're permanently and always out of balance with our parents. And that's correct. When we turn 18, we don't get a bill from our parents for all that they gave us. It's like in really messed up households, right? So how does the balance get retained? It's by giving to the next generation and taking our place. I'm just starting to think about this a little bit because obviously me and a lot of other people don't have kids. And they say, well, what about me? And then I always say something nice like, well, you give in other ways, you support, people and, you contribute, blah, 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 blah. But I actually think there may be something systemic about not having kids and being permanently out of balance, having received more life than you've given. Unless you ended up somehow like as a doctor or something like that, where you save a lot of lives, maybe that might match it. So I actually think for those of us who choose not to have children, there's probably something there worth addressing in terms of the imbalance we put ourselves into in regards to that. Yeah, so last one. Taking, and there's a lot of ways to put this. Taking responsibility without revenge. So this is in instances of trespasses and violations. It's really important to systems that people take responsibility for the things that they've done. To say, I did that. And for the group to be able to say, yeah, dad did that, or mom did that, or whatever. Again, not you did that. This is why you saw me last night. I often have to have people say something 2 or 3 times and say, no, take all that emotional stuff out, just with your dignity. You did that, right? It's a really different vibration, right? But without revenge, no. One of the things that I distrust most of all in a constellation, when everyone in the room, including me, has agreed that one person is to blame, even if it matches the story. You know, there's something really off balance about it. But systems do not like it when perpetrators get off. It just makes things out of whack, right? So that taking responsibility, naming perpetrators without revenge is very key, which this was the correction if you were starting to get nervous about this, all right? Like, does that mean what we do doesn't matter? You know, that as long as you're belonging, you're innocent, you know. Actually, within the systems of belonging, violations really need to be named and included and acknowledged. Otherwise, systems go a little nutty. Okay, those are the orders of love in families. They function, therefore, for people like us, as a diagnostic tool. And resource for interventions. So client's got depression. Is there some reality that hasn't been honored and hasn't been included? Is it that they or someone else hasn't been able to belong? Is something about seniority being violated here? Is there a balance of giving and taking? Is there some violation that hasn't been acknowledged? Now, this is laid out this way for the usefulness of noticing them, but obviously it's a mix of things, right? And as I said, all of them can kind of, all 1, 2, 3, 4 of these could come underneath this honoring what is thing. But having the more specific categories is helpful, because if the depression is mostly a way to ensure belonging to a system with unimaginable loss that was never honored or grieved at the time, then what we can do is that we can honor what happened, yeah? And then belonging can be based on something other than having depression. Right? Now we've got some more options in the system. And there's probably, in that case, something off about seniority, because if they're trying to honor what is in their depression, then they're taking too senior a role in the system by trying to be the ones that guarantee the wellness of the ones who came before, not our job, yeah, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? So it's really important. What I find is that a lot of people hear about this stuff, and then they kind of forget about it. You know? They go off and do constellations in the field, and whatever shows up, they sort of deal with. You actually kind of want to get these into your muscle memory, because these are really, really critical. However, they need to be held in a fairly gentle way. The other error, of course, in constellations is saying, oh, the person needs to be junior to their parents. They're not being junior to their parents. Let's make them bow to the mother, right? Who was really, really abusive. So they do that. But what they've done then is that they didn't include and honor the abuse that took place. And maybe that needs to happen first, right? So the art of constellations is feeling what's arising in the constellation and having a sense of kind of what needs to happen first, and then what needs to happen second, what needs to happen third. Anyone who's seen me do this enough, Jeff, you've seen me do this enough to attempt a movement and then realize, oh, it's too soon for that. There's something else I needed to do first, or something else that needed to be included first. Yeah. So you can feel it's like, well, okay, so 5 minutes. Take a moment. I just talked a whole bunch. I talked about, just so you can have a sense of whether you have any questions or anything or thoughts. A little bit about the ancestors and the larger field, unresolved trauma, and how we reach back to help. That's what entanglements are. The dynamic, the conscience of belonging, and the orders of love. So any questions, any thoughts, any real life examples that come to mind that you want to address before we dive off to lunch?
I have a question. When you do this work as petition now, do you develop your intuition? Is that what is going on?
Jeff knows my lecture on intuition.
Is that what we are supposed to be paying attention? Is that what involves the field?
Yeah. So I'll give you the quick answer because I could go well into lunch with an answer to that question.
Okay.
Technically, I don't believe in intuition very much, actually. I think mostly what we call intuition is a knowing that arises from cues that are not conscious to us. Yeah. So what lets you know that that guy in front of you is going to cut in front of you on the highway before he's done anything to really give you reason? But you start to slow down because you know he's about to do that. There are all these subtle cues going on, and we're built that way. Biologically, I mean, you hang out with animals, mammals we've come from, they're processing spectacular amounts of what we would call unconscious information about, oh, he's nervous and she's scared, and why is she not inside the group, and all this sort of stuff. We are wired to be consciously and unconsciously tracking spectacular amounts of information. Part of what you need to do with embodied learning, this is true, horseback riding I've done a lot with, sure it's skiing, basketball, other kinds of things. Part of the discomfort of learning embodied activities is you've actually got to unlearn some stuff. So you get on the back of a horse and you do this because, you feel braced about falling forward. And they're like, lean back. And you're like, you got to be kidding me. If I lean back, I'm going to die, right? I can't prop myself up. I can't protect myself. I can't, if something happens. But somehow you've got to train your body not only to not do the thing it used to do, but to actually find this the better position. This takes practice. Yeah. So obviously, in the long run, all of this stuff and all the other stuff I'm going to teach in the practice and blah, 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 I'm hoping becomes enough of a muscle memory, just the stuff that happens because you've been trained your body enough, that it arises in a way that you might call intuition. The reason why I'm not so fond of the word intuition is that I find that a lot of people who like the word intuition start facilitating and do all kinds of crazy crap in the name of intuition because they don't have any of the scaffolding. They don't have any of the principles. So they'll have, one thing that we generally don't do in constellations is have parents apologize to children. But in our culture, we do that. Apologizing is just part of who we are, or children forgive their parents. We don't tend to do that here. But if you don't have the scaffolding, you would feel perfect. And I've seen people who just have a little bit of learning and they start to facilitate and my teeth is put on edge. Because they're getting feelings and thoughts, and so they're acting on the intuitions, but without anything to structure what's coming in and to be self-critical about what's arising. Because there's stuff that shows up that is this morning when I was thinking about doing the Chile, United States, and Germany little thing, I asked myself 3 or 4 times, and I don't know the answer. In the end, you've just got to try something. But is that something arising? Is that just a cool idea I've had, and who cares? And, so the answer to you is yes and no.
Thank you.
There you go.
But mostly it's no, not because those of you who have sort of psychic, you feel like you have some energy reading or psychic skills that I don't want you to use them. They can be extremely useful. But because until you have a framework for judging what's arising and then doing things in a way that seems remotely within the realm of something that makes sense. I mean, family constellations without this, I would never want to be part of it. I wouldn't, because then you would probably do a lot of encouraging people more into their entanglements. Sure, take care of your mom. That's really nice. That looks really sweet. Let your mom rest on you. Because it feels good and it's arising and it's what's happening in the field. But it's actually a sign of what's stuck. Now, there are exceptions to all these things. Okay? I've had moments where, a quote unquote, a violation of the order's love is really clearly what's being called for. But I ask myself the question 20 times before I engage an exception. So I really want to be sure I'm doing something useful for the client. And a lot of, there is no pure intuition. Everything is shaped by culture and context. And in terms of this sort of stuff, a lot of it is fed by this.
Storytelling.
Yeah. And so, and we may not even notice that we're doing that. Like the whole frame of codependency, once you have that in place, everything's about codependency. Just everything is. Now, codependency is a super useful concept, right? But it's just one amongst many. And mostly we want to sort of, lift concepts. These are not concepts, these are patterns. These are things that we've noticed in families. Anyway, so that's, and if what you mean is you want to get to a place where you can feel like you can trust some movement towards what's arising in you, and like trust what's arising, even if it doesn't always make sense. Yes, absolutely. That's what I hope for you.
That's what I was, as a representative, you just trust whatever is going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, but we don't always do. Yeah. So again, like there are times actually like there's the angry representative was leaning on the sister, and I could feel it didn't feel right. I could feel like it was grating something. So I was like, could you stop leaning on her and just, we need to figure out a different way to do this. So there are times when something's arising quite naturally, and someone will, sometimes I interrupt something and someone will say, I was just doing what I was feeling. And I'm like, that's awesome, but we are up to more than just doing what we're feeling. So it's balancing a lot of different stuff. And the final thing I want to say, I'm going to send you off to lunch, is I want you to exercise your strengths and do it your way. Bert Hellinger literally does silent 20-minute constellations now. No reporting out, barely an interview. Things just unfold and then done. That's not a constellation I could lead that way. Some people are more talky. Some people like only 2 or 3 representatives. Others want all the dead of World War II in the room. I think of Dan and Emily, who are facilitators on the East Coast. I call them, they do kitchen sink constellations because they literally have everything. Then Mariana Frankrich, who will have the mother, the father, and the client, and it's so simple. And it's, so you're going to develop your strengths, and that's something I really want for you as well. Yeah. And you're going to integrate it with other modalities, EFT, or people who know a lot of psychology, or 5 elements Chinese medicine.
And shamanic practices.
Yeah, there are all kinds of different syntheses that people are doing once they have a basic knowing. So I encourage that. Okay, let's do lunch. Please be back by about 2:40. So you have time to nest. 2:20, right? Because our goal is to start about 2:35.